Welcome to my really messy office. So this is my 2017 256 gig 10.5 inch iPad Pro, and it needs replacing. Why did I get it in the first place? What do I use it for? Why does it need replacing? And better question, what should I replace it with? Let's get into it. So I got this iPad as a used refurbished model in late 2018. I bought it as a machine to take while traveling. The thing's been all over the world to me, including 2 extended trips to Africa. iPads, in fact, are superb travel machines. It's quite possibly their best use case. They're more rugged than a MacBook. They're more portable. They're easier to use than a laptop, quicker to charge, easier to share things with others, like to show people pictures or maps or documents. You can store all sorts of things on them, like PDFs and documents and pictures of your passport, which are kind of helpful when you travel. You can take books to read. The list is endless. I bought this particular iPad Pro for 4 primary reasons.
Number one, I could use it like a laptop with a keyboard case, or not. I can't stand typing on an iPad screen, so a keyboard's essential, and I've had a few of them. But I'm a 3-finger typist, so I don't need a fantastic keyboard. No magic keyboard for me. Number 2, I love the quad speakers and the 120 hertz ProMotion display. Everything sounds great and looks great too. Number 3, I got it in a 256 gig configuration to handle trip photos. More on that workflow in a minute. Number 4, no one ever mentions this, but that lightning connector down there was the first iPad to offer USB 3.0 data transfer speeds, though you need the right accessories to get that speed. That was probably the single most important reason I got this particular iPad Pro in 2018.
Those latter two, that 256 gig storage and the USB 3.0 data transfer speeds, combine to make a bulletproof photo management and backup system while traveling. Let me go down that rabbit hole because it matters a lot, especially as to how I use my iPad and, more importantly, what I need from one into the future.
On each of my 2 African safaris, is just one example, my wife and I would each shoot over 600 photos a day. Over a 5-week period, we'd each fill up a 64 gig card and part of a 32 gig card too on each of our cameras. Some people buy souvenirs and trinkets on vacation. We take pictures. My photo workflow was this. Each day, I would copy our day's pics onto the Photos app of the iPad, rate of about 2.5 gigs of photos a day. I would not erase them from the camera card or iPhone. I'd just leave them there. I'd use the Photos app to do minor edits and ID some fave pics. I could easily show others we were traveling with the great pics I got because it's easy to show pics on an iPad. And every day, I'd back up the entire photo library onto a separate 128 gig SD card. Notice that this process always leaves me with 3 copies of every picture. I'm backed up and protected. Someone steals my camera, pics are backed up on the iPad and on the backup card. Someone steals my iPad, pics are backed up on my camera and backup card. Someone steals my luggage where the backup cards are, pics are on my camera and the iPad.
256 gig is the perfect memory size to do this. On one Africa trip alone, we came out with 180 gigs of photos, lots of room on a 256 gig iPad for them and everything else that I kept on it. And why does the data transfer speed matter? Moving pictures back and forth between the cameras and the iPad. At the time, for example, my wife had an iPad 6th generation and it only had a USB 2.0 transfer speeds. Copying 2.5 gigs across that connection took over 40 minutes. With this iPad Pro, 10 minutes tops. So the iPad Pro is perfect for traveling and perfect for managing pics while traveling. So what else has it been good for and what else do I use it for?
Well, it's a great reader device. I take out ebooks from the library and read them. I do this while traveling, but I also do it at home. Reading a book is an awful experience on my MacBook, but it's perfect on an iPad. And over the last few years, I found my iPad is a great field computer. I'm on the bear management team where I live. In the summer, I get to spend a lot of time stewarding bears roadside. My iPad is always with me, bouncing around in my truck on gravel roads where I'm almost always out of cell service. Stored on it are manuals for the equipment I use, detailed maps I need to do the work I do. I have lots of other reference info stored on my iPad. Bear management protocols, databases of bear information, radio communication protocols, just to name a few. An iPad enables me to do the paperwork I need to do on the fly, in the field, live, and in real time. That means I get good data and keep excellent records. And I use my Apple Pencil to annotate maps and write notes on things every single day I'm in the field. My MacBook would get wrecked doing this work, but my iPad, rugged enough to take it.
But only those three uses, traveling, field work, and reading, are the only things I like to use my iPad for. Everything else is better on my MacBook. So in the end, I just don't use my iPad that much. But it's really useful for what I do use it for. My problem is this particular iPad Pro needs replacing. Why? It still does everything I need it to do, and it does really, really well. Sure, it no longer gets iPad OS updates, and it doesn't support Apple Intelligence, so I haven't quite figured out what use Apple Intelligence is yet. So I don't know why I care about that. But the simple problem, the battery's shot. According to Coconut Battery, there's almost 600 cycles on this battery, and its health is only around 78%. And what that means is on a recent trip that I went on, from a full charge, I could just read a book for less than 3 hours before the battery died. A 2.5-hour movie on an airplane flight, and the whole battery was gone. I was sick recently. I watched a 90-minute YouTube video and chewed 80% of my battery. I'm lucky to make it through a whole fieldwork day without having to top up the power at least once. Constantly worrying about whether my iPad will make it through my day is just annoying. A place to plug it in, a backup battery bank are must-haves for me always with this machine. My battery has become almost unusable in 6 years, even though the rest of the machine is just fine, thanks very much. By the way, I inquired where I live. No one wants to try to replace the battery on this thing. If you want to know why, just check iFixit's battery replacement guide for the 10.5 iPad Pro. It's hellacious on this machine. It's getting easier to replace batteries on iPads. Yay for Apple for that one, but not this puppy. And Apple now has officially stopped offering any kind of paid battery upgrade service because this model is just too old. So I have to replace this iPad because it's close to being useless, or at the very least powerless. But what should I replace it with? Let's eliminate the obvious first.
A 10th gen iPad is way too much of a step back and just does not have the functionality I need. It only has USB 2.0 speeds on its port. I use the Pencil, so the non-laminated display of the 10th gen isn't great. No, it takes no boxes, no 10th gen. A 256 gig, 11-inch M4 iPad Pro is just way massive overkill and way too much money for the three things I use my iPad for. It's 1,400 Canadian dollars, for heaven's sakes. The two things that it does have going for it is a screen that's easier to see in the daytime, and it has USB 4 speeds on the connector. My 10.5 iPad Pro only has 500 nits of brightness, and it's a little dim, but I've managed. And USB 3 is fine. No, the M4 Pro is out. No, and more no. However, an 11-inch M1 or M2 iPad Pro is appealing. Around here, I can get the 256 gig models for between 720 and 900 Canadian. Both the M1 and M2 offer USB 4 speeds on the port, which is great. I'd worry about the battery degradation on an M1. They were released in 2021 early, so I'd be looking at 2 to 3 years of battery deg already. Because of the M1 battery deg concerns, I'd probably go with an M2 that had been refurbished. They're available here for just under $800. A new 256 gig 11-inch iPad Air is way less appealing than a used M2 iPad Pro. First off, it's $950 Canadian. That's 20% more expensive for an obviously worse machine. It lacks the quad speakers, and it lacks the ProMotion of the Pro models. It has USB 3.2 speeds, not USB 4 for the port, but 3.2 is fine, so that's not a big drawback. I'd get an M2 Pro way before I would get an M2 Air, so no to a new M2 Air, and especially no to an M1 Air for the battery deg issue.
So that leaves the iPad mini. I know iPad minis well. My wife used to have an iPad mini Gen 2, but it became useless because the battery died, and plus the home button died as well. Other reviewers talk about how there's not a lot of difference between the 6th gen and the 7th gen iPad mini, and used 6th gens are widely available. But again, if I got to use 6th gen, I'd worry about battery degradation, so let's just say no to the 6th generation.
Besides which, the 7th gen has a faster chip, USB 3.2 data transfer speeds instead of 3.1 on the Gen 6, and 8 gigs of RAM. It doesn't have ProMotion or quad speakers. Still, for my use case, how critical is that? Nice to have for sure, but not essential. A new 256 gig iPad mini 7th gen runs around 830 Canadian here, just a bit more than a used 256 gig M2 iPad Pro.
But where the iPad mini really shines is portability. As I mentioned, this is the old, dead, 2nd gen iPad mini. It's basically the same physical dimensions as the iPad 7th gen. It's got half the weight of an M2 Pro. It's about half the weight of my 10.5. That's heck yeah. It's the perfect size for reading. It's entirely adequate for photo management while traveling. It basically ticks every box that I would have, and it ticks them many ways better than an M2 iPad Pro.
The downside to the Mini's portability is keyboards. Remember, I loathe typing on an iPad screen. This keyboard on my iPad Pro is not full size, but it's way bigger than any keyboard case a Mini fits into. I'll get a keyboard case if I get a Mini, but I'm betting I won't like it.
Something I will do differently this time is that, well, I'll get a pencil. It won't be an Apple Pencil. I don't do art. I have no talent whatsoever. I do own Procreate, and I use it occasionally. Everybody should own Procreate. If you've got an iPad, it's a superb tool for doing all sorts of things, even if you aren't going to be an artist. But I don't need squeezing and barrel rolling and hovering and other such things.
For the things I use a pencil for, marking up maps, signing documents, a generic over-the-counter pencil is just fine, thank you very much. They're less than half the price of an Apple USB-C pencil and do the same things. I got to admit, I like magnetic charging, which most generic pencils don't have. And I like magnetic charging because this nonsensical pencil charging system has driven me nuts for the last 6 years. And by the way, my iPad Pro isn't the only thing with no battery life. My first-gen Apple Pencil's almost no battery life too. Lasts about an hour or so on a charge.
So I'm only seeing two options: a refurbished or used M2 iPad Pro or a 7th generation iPad mini. What do you think? Am I missing something in my analysis? Right now, the M2 iPad Pro is a better deal. It's clearly a better machine than the iPad mini, and it's slightly cheaper. But the iPad mini 7th gen actually matches my use cases closer. It's better for reading, it's better for traveling, and it's probably a wash when it comes to field work. Maybe not quite as good because of the display, but certainly adequate. I suspect, though, my best strategy is to wait until the iPad mini 7th gens come into the refurb store, Apple's actual refurb store. They'll probably end up in the 750, maybe 800 Canadian mark. I have the luxury of waiting, which is great, since I won't use my iPad during the next few winter months. When it does show up in the refurb store, I can look at the state of the M2 iPad Pro pricing and compare pricing between the refurb iPad mini and the M2 Pros. But I am interested in what you think. Would a move from a 2017 10.5-inch iPad Pro to an iPad mini be too much of a downgrade? Or maybe the opposite, is upgrading from an M2 to an M2 iPad Pro useful, or would it be pointless? Add your comments down below. I'm looking forward to what your thoughts on my replacement dilemma. And feel free to like this video if you found it useful, informative, or something worth laughing about. In any case, thanks for watching to the end, and sorry about my messy office.